Another aspect of having a puppy is vaccinating. A lot of different things have changed in the last few years, but the puppy series has pretty much stayed the same. And basically why we have a series of vaccines is when we give a vaccine, we're actually giving your puppy a small dose of the disease in one form or another. It may be a piece of protein, it may be a dead virus, it may be a virus that's been modified or added on to another virus where it actually grows in the system. That's all complicated stuff, but the reality is we're exposing your dog to a potential disease threat in a manner that does not cause disease in your pet, so that eventually they will build up an immunity. Now, when a puppy is born, it gets colostrum from its mother. That's the very first milk. You've heard that first milk is very important. Well, the reason that is they actually get antibodies against most of these diseases from their mother. This creates their own little kind of false immune system that they have up until somewhere between 6 to 10 weeks typically, where that will be protective in nature. But at that stage, at 6 to 10 weeks, somewhere in that time frame, they will actually produce their own immune system and their mother's immune system will wear out. Now, if this puppy has never been exposed to anything, never had a vaccine, it's at high risk during this time. And that's the typical time most people get puppies. So it's very, very important to get to a veterinarian as soon as you get the puppy and start the vaccine series. Now, the very first vaccine we give is not protective. It takes about 2 weeks to build up an immunity for that puppy. So if you get it vaccinated today and take it to the dog park tomorrow or take it to the ball field the day after that, that puppy is not protected. In reality, a good percentage of our puppies are not protected until they have their very last vaccine, which is after 16 weeks of age. Now the series is going to vary depending on the age of the puppy, what time you bring it in and that. But typically we do a 3 vaccine series, but the most important shot of that series is the one that we give after 16 weeks. The typical vaccine that we give during that time period is distemper parvo. Those are 2 diseases that the average person in this day and age has never even seen. I grew up in the day and age when parvo hit fairly early on. It was a terrible disease. If we do see it, it's terrible for everybody involved because a veterinarian can't charge you enough for what it's worth to treat that, and you usually can't afford even if he discounts his bill for you. And so it's not a good scenario for either one. So it's much easier to prevent the problem than it is to wait until you have the problem. In that series of vaccine, very commonly we'll include a shot, or oral or nasal, called Bordetella, which is also for a disease called kennel cough. And this is like the common cold of dogs. And that's variable. Some veterinarians require it, others don't. What you find though, if you ever have to board the dog or you take them to doggy daycare, a lot of them are going to require that you have that because it is like the common cold. So if one dog's sick at a boarding facility, a lot of times everybody's going to get sick. So it's just a good protection, not only for you, but for everybody else in the boarding facility. Another vaccine that we will give during the puppy series is rabies. Typically, it's given somewhere between 3 to 5 months of age, and then it's boosted a year out. This is a vaccine that most states and counties require by law. And the reason being is if an animal does have rabies and a human has an exposure to that, the potential for that person to die is great. Now, if we know that they have rabies, of course we can vaccinate and prevent that. But the problem is a lot of times, especially with puppies, if a puppy bites on somebody at the park, bites at somebody at the puppy, the daycare or that, and something happens to the puppy, a lot of times we don't associate it with rabies, and therefore we have a lot of exposure. A case in point, years ago when I was in vet school, we actually had a puppy that traveled over 5 states, stopped at all the potty break stops, played with people, bit people, roughhouse with other dogs, come up with rabies. In a situation like that, it's very hard to backtrack and see all the exposures. Unfortunately, if somebody was exposed and actually got bit by the puppy when he was shedding the virus, in 6 months they're going to be dead. There is no treatment for rabies. Very, very few people survive rabies. So that's why it's required by law. Now, every one of our vaccines need to be boosted in a certain time frame. And the reason for the booster is we need to remind the immune system that it knows that this is a bad disease, and if it comes along, then they can fight it off. Rabies is typically boosted a year later, and the distemper parvo typically is boosted a year later, and then it's done every 3 years. Now, the protocol that's come out from the veterinary community actually said that that should be on an as-risk basis. This is an area I think a lot of times the veterinarians tend to not discuss with you, but if you've got a dog that you're taking to a lot of dog shows, you're traveling around the country, you're going to boarding facilities, you're doing rescue on the side, that's a dog that's high risk and probably needs to be vaccinated more frequently. There's a lot of controversy on that, but that's a discussion you probably need to have with your veterinarian as to the risk factor. There also is a test that we can run on some of these vaccines called a titer test. And what a titer test is it basically measures the amount of antibodies within the body against the disease. And this is all in great, other than the fact that we really don't know 100% what a protective titer is. We think we do, but in the same token, it's not a guarantee. So there is a certain amount of risk factor involved in doing just titers. The other aspect with that is running titer tests are very expensive. So a lot of times you're going to pay anywhere from 3 to 5 times more for the test than you would pay for the vaccine itself. So a lot of people will decide to go ahead and vaccinate and do that. So why not vaccinate more frequently? Well, there is a theory out there in thought and some research to say that by over-vaccinating, we may cause some problems. In humans, autism is one of the things that they commonly look at as a potential secondary effect for over-vaccinating. Where this comes in is we have a lot of vaccines available to us, and I think as they come on board, then a lot of people jumped on and they wanted to vaccinate for everything. And I think you can overstimulate the immune system, so it's very important to have that discussion with your veterinarian as to what's really important in your area.